Welcome everybody to Design for Drupal Boston. It's kind of a combination of 2020, 2021. This is still the 2020 webinar series. And this year is the 13th anniversary of Design for Drupal Boston. Today's featured speaker for our webinar is Kim Lai. The topic is UX mistakes made in 2020 and how to fix them. So we're really looking forward to hearing from Kim today. So thank you, Kim, for joining us. We're still on the year 2020 in terms of these are the webinars. So the keynote was Christina Chumulis. This was back last June. The talk was on the Claro admin theme. Very interesting talk. So there is a link to it on the design4drupal.org website. If you would like to go back and watch that, it was a great keynote. We had a full day of contributions last June. The two main things we were contributing on were the Claro theme, which is on the Slack channel admin-UI. We also had Mike Herschel from Lullabot talk about Olivero. The Slack channel for that is D9-theme. That is going to be the default theme in Drupal 9. It's there as an experimental module now. So those are both great places to contribute if you're in the design and front end space or any other way you want to join to contribute, whether it's testing, documentation, accessibility. There are many, many, many ways for those who don't strictly consider themselves coding to contribute to the Drupal project. The upcoming webinar series, we only have one more that we're going to do this year in April. The announcement's coming soon. I'm just finalizing with the speaker for that. So we'll have one more in April. May, we're going to kind of just take off because we're setting up for the June actual next event for Design for Drupal. So we are planning for this year's event. We don't have exactly what it is, the format. It will be virtual. The dates, if you could save the dates of June 23rd and 24th, those are the dates we're currently looking at for Design for Drupal Boston 2021. And we'll be putting details up on the website soon. We do need your help. A lot of volunteers, everybody's very busy in these COVID times. We're down to just a handful, not even a handful of volunteers. So we definitely need your help. We're a volunteer, it's nonprofit. You can get contribution credits though for helping us out. So, for those of you who may not be code contributors on a regular basis, feel free to reach out to us and you can join our team and you would get some non-code contribution credits for helping us out. We're looking for a web developer to help us with the website, speakers, whether it's the webinar series speakers, keynote speakers, things of that nature, event coordinators, help with email and social marketing. And we will be looking for sponsors for this Design for Drupal 2021 and the webinar series going forward for that. So all you really need is a desire to help us out. So reach out to Boston at designfordrupal.org. Would love to have you. It can be just a little bit of your time. Don't feel like it's going to be, totally time consuming for you. Any little help you can give us would be appreciated. Community events coming up. DrupalCon is right around the corner, April 12th to 16th. I put the link there to register, events.drupal.org/DrupalCon 2021. The registration fee right now is $245. That's for the entire week, April 12th to 16th. And it also gives you enrollment in all the industry summits, which I'll talk about in a minute. It's a different format this year. It's more half days rather than, the full. I think we had 10-hour days trying to cover the entire globe last year. I think they've cut that down. There's more contribution sessions. So each day will have a theme and then there'll be the ability to contribute later in the day. So it's not like you have to be on a Zoom call, the entire 8 or 10 hours for the day. So it's a really good format, really looking forward to it. There are scholarships. If anybody needs help being able to sign up. The scholarship, I believe, ends this Friday. So go to the link there that I have, and just reach out and and just say I'm interested in a scholarship. If you can register, though, make sure you try to do it soon so that we can plan for how many folks will be there. The summits that I spoke about, the community summit, that's on April 6th. So the summits go throughout the month of April. Getting a ticket to DrupalCon includes all these summits. The Higher Ed Summit is April 20th. Healthcare is on April 22nd, and nonprofit is on April 27th. And government is on April 29th. So all these summits used to be part of the 3 or 4 day DrupalCons. They've now spread these out over the month. So these are like day-long summits where experts in these different fields will speak, and there'll be all kinds of different sessions and talks and interactive things around these different vertical topics. Drupal Fest is another month-long celebration. This is to celebrate the 20 years of Drupal. There'll be events around the world. They're trying to get people to submit events that are focused on a particular area so that, maybe you're not in North America, you're, in another region of the globe, and you'd like to have something in your time zone. So you can just submit these different events, and then because everything's virtual right now, people from all over the globe can join you. And there's a list of confirmed events on the Drupal Fest page. So check that out. That'll be exciting for the whole month of April. The community events right now, Mid-Camp is happening this week, Wednesday to Saturday. Really exciting format this year. Mid-Camp today is Community Day. So if you're really not that familiar with Drupal, there's things on what is Drupal, why would you want to use Drupal, meeting the Drupal community, how to make the most out of Mid-Camp. That's really today's day. And then tomorrow it's an unconference where, you can just propose what you want to talk about. And then there's contribution days as well. So that's exciting. That's happening. Registration, suggested registration is $20 for that. But again, if you have, if that's an issue, you can just change the cost to $0 on the registration page, and you can just attend. They don't want to block anybody from attending. So that's a great opportunity. As I said, Design for Drupal Boston, save the dates, the 23rd and 24th. The Drupal Association does help out. It supports the Drupal project. So, if you can contribute to that, that would be great as well. There is a community/events page on Drupal.org that lists all the events I've mentioned. Mid-Camp was just happening this week, but there's many, many events, local meetups, things that you can join globally that virtually that you may not be able to get to on a regular basis. So check that page out, find out all the different things going on. The code of conduct, all participants are expected to treat everybody with dignity and respect, whether we're in person, we're online, we're in Slack channels, wherever we might be gathering. So please check out the Drupal Code of Conduct. There's a link in the footer of our website. It does follow the DrupalCon, Code of Conduct as well. If you have any concerns, reach out to Patrick or myself. I want to spend 1 minute thanking our digital sponsors, REDFIN Solutions, Lullabot, McPhee Design, American Graphics Institute, Dev Collaborative, Oomph, Isovera, Talking Drupal, 108 Degrees, Oddbird. So thank you to everybody. Those were our 2020 digital sponsors that covered all the way through to 2021. So we'll be reaching out and looking for folks to sponsor, the next Design for Drupal event and the webinar series going forward throughout the rest of this year up until June of 2022. Spread the word about today's event, d4d Boston, the hashtag. We'll use the Q&A feature, not the chat feature. So as Kim goes through the webinar, feel free to ask questions. We will gather those up and present those to Kim at the end of the presentation. And that is it. So this is the March webinar, and it's with Kim, and I'm going to hand over to Patrick to introduce Kim.
Thanks, Leslie. Hey everyone, my name is Patrick Corbett. I work with Leslie at REDFIN Solutions, and we're here to welcome our speaker today, Kim Lai. Kim is an experienced designer, content strategist, and overall problem solver who strives to provide data-informed solutions that are clear and delightful. Very important. Her educational and professional experiences have led her to her current position at Kanopi Studios, where she is their UX strategist and designer. And Kim's here today to help us learn how to make our website stand out in this increasingly crowded online space. Welcome to Design for Drupal, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome. So what I'm going to be discussing today is the mistakes that I have encountered in 2020. So a little bit about me. I work with a lot of different clients. I work at an agency. A lot of what my focus is on mission-driven clients. So nonprofits are those who are looking to further the good of the world in some way. I have my master's in web design and new technology from the Academy of Art University in San Francisco, and that is where I'm coming to you today, is from San Francisco. So let's hope that my coffee kicks in during this presentation. I have my LinkedIn QR code right here if you're interested in connecting with me online after this presentation. Please feel free to use that. And like many people in the world, I got myself a COVID puppy. So let's just hope that she's gonna cooperate with me today. But if you do hear some taps or rumbling around, it's probably her at my feet. Okay, so today we're gonna go through 5 things. One is carousels, pop-ups, sidebars, autoplay videos, and buttons. And there was a few things for me to choose from, but I felt like these were the features that I came across most in 2020, and I think had fairly simple solutions to improve upon the experience of these design patterns. So carousels, and when I say carousels, I particularly mean carousels on the homepage, at the top of your homepage. I understand the desire to want to utilize these features because it gives you a way to have all of your information above the fold. And I use fold in air quotes because the fold is really hard to define nowadays. You know, I'm using a 13-inch laptop right now, but I have colleagues who use 27-inch desktop monitors. And I come across lots of clients who the majority of their users are using mobile devices. So just even in those 3 examples, the fold varies wildly from small to large. So, and I think another thing that we need to understand is that most people are conditioned to scroll nowadays, thanks to mobile devices. People are really used to just opening up a screen and immediately scrolling down the page. So being concerned about above the fold type content isn't really something that I feel like we need to necessarily focus on. It's definitely important, but it's not the only thing that we really should be considering when we think about creating a story or a narrative on a singular page. There's a couple of reasons also why carousels can be a little difficult. One is that content can be missed quite easily. So again, often people scroll on a page immediately. And if they do that, they might scroll past anything else that's not on slide 1. So if you have important content on slides 2 to 5, you are assuming that people are going to stay at the top of your site and click through or wait for the auto carousel to move to see the rest of the information. And that's expecting quite a lot of people. We know that 76% of users scan pages, and they scan pages fairly quickly. So having to sit there and click through a carousel doesn't necessarily invite or doesn't really jive with that kind of behavior. It also can be misleading if you have content on that first slide that doesn't necessarily align to your visions or your values. It can be a bit confusing for someone who may not know who you are to learn about what you're about and what your values are. So you can give the wrong impression if that is their first introduction to you and your organization. And mobile issues. So the typical application I've seen of carousels on mobile devices are having the image at the top and then having text below. And that's great for accessibility reasons. That's great. However, that also adds the additional exercise of having to click through the carousel and also scrolling up and down to see all of the content in the slide. So again, we're just adding another layer of things that someone needs to do in order to read and consume that content, which isn't great. We really want to make absorbing content as easy to do as possible. So there's a couple of ways that we can make this experience better. One thing that I always try to push my clients towards is to choose a really impactful hero image with some text that displays key business goals or key user goals. You really want to be very clear up front who you are and what you're about. Because if you can't define, if someone doesn't know who you are in the first 5 to 10 seconds, it's more likely that they're going to leave because they don't understand who you are and what kind of value you're going to bring them. Another thing I really like to use is card pattern designs, which you can see in this left image. Cards are a really great way of showing a lot of information in one screenful, if that really is your goal. And it doesn't require people to necessarily click through a carousel in order to see them. This is a mobile example, obviously, but imagine this expanded across a laptop or a desktop. You could potentially get up to 4 to 5 cards in a single screenful if you want, which I think can be very powerful, and it might make a lot of your stakeholders very happy if they can see pathways to important content right there in one screen. The next thing is intrusive pop-ups. So you encounter these, and I really can't disregard the effectiveness of pop-ups. There's a lot of case studies out there that show that if you have a pop-up such as this cooking light pop-up, where it really does help convert more people to whatever call to action you have in that pop-up. I really can't discount the effectiveness of them. So I'm not going to argue that. What I can say is that what these pop-ups are really designed to do is they hijack the current flow of whatever page you're on. So if you're reading through an article, if you're looking at the About page, if you're looking at a home page, it breaks the concentration that one might have reading through that content in order to present them with totally different content and ask them to do something, which can be a little bit jarring. I know I find them quite annoying. I'm sure I'm not alone necessarily in that sentiment. And there are other things to consider when we talk about pop-ups. One big thing is your Google SEO ranking. So in 2017, Google did announce that any site who had pop-ups that made content less accessible would be penalized in their search rankings. And they were fairly specific on what kind of pop-ups they meant. This is actually a screenshot from that documentation from Google. And the reason why they did this is because they felt like, one, it was really making it quite difficult to, especially on mobile devices, to read and get through content in a way that felt fairly intuitive and natural and didn't disrupt the normal behavior of people on mobile devices. So they really were trying to be fairly cognizant, and they wanted to be very thoughtful of how they utilized this rule. Now, this doesn't apply to pop-ups that require you to say you're over 21 because you're going to use a liquor website, or if you're in the EU, GDPR concerns or cookie concerns, those things that actually that show people information that they need and ask people questions in order to interact with the site. those will not be affected, but any sort of like, here's a deal or sign up for my newsletter, things like that will be penalized. Another thing to consider with pop-ups is the accessibility factor. A lot of pop-ups have these keyboard traps, and what a keyboard trap is once the pop-up opens, there's no way for you to close that pop-up just by using your keyboard. You have to figure out how to get to the close button or to the little X button that's outside of the square, and that could be quite difficult and really troublesome and irksome for individuals who are just using keyboards to navigate the web. And screen readers, it can be really jarring when you're reading through a page that's talking about koalas, and then all of a sudden the screen reader starts reading about some promotional opportunity that's available to you for the next 3 hours. It completely is a 180 from the content that you're reading to the content that is now being read. So you do want to make thoughtful decisions about how it's going to affect those audiences as well. Things that you can do to avoid kind of this trap. One thing that we always like to utilize is sidebar content. So having any sort of major call to action, any sort of newsletter sign up, any contact us button. We like displaying that in the sidebar because then it's nicely paired with the content that you're reading right now. And it's always displayed on page. So you don't necessarily have to wait for a pop-up to show up. And if no one can close out of that pop-up and they never see it again, it is there for their convenience. Another tip I like to use is to delay the opening of pop-ups to either maybe the pop-up opens when we know that someone scrolled to the bottom of the page, or maybe the pop-up opens when we can see the cursor moving up to the X and the page is about to be abandoned. Another thing I like to steer clients towards is looking at your Google Analytics to see what the average time on page is or time on site is, and trying to, take about 10 or 20 seconds off that time and say, someone spends about 1:30 seconds on your site on average, then I would say, let's open the pop-up 1 minute and 10 seconds into their experience with the site. That way we are hopefully giving people enough time to get through their entire flow, and then they're more open and more apt to do or get themselves involved in whatever the pop-up is asking them to do. And then the biggest thing, and Google does suggest this, is creating and designing pop-ups that take up less than 50% of the page's space. And again, this is particularly important when you're looking at mobile devices. So anything that you're doing on desktop, you have a lot more space to play with, making sure that that mobile experience pop-up is still taking up less than 50% of the entire screen full of content. Sidebars. So we just talked about sidebars. When I say sidebars here, what I'm specifically speaking to is that sticky sidebar menu. I'm sure many of you have come across sticky sidebar menus. They are used in a lot of e-commerce sites. I came across a lot of sidebar menus in my time in 2020. And I think they can be really helpful. But I think the way they were implemented, or at least the way I was seeing that they were being implemented, there are ways for us to improve that experience. So what I'm talking about here is sidebars that provide navigation links to other related content, or topics, or any other pieces or parts of your navigation system that might be relevant based on the content that they are reading right now on the page. And I think that there's a couple of ways that we can improve the use of sidebars. I actually really love sidebar navigations. I think they're really helpful when you want to show someone the depth of your expertise in a particular topic. I think it really needs to kind of stay that, if we're using also a top navigation and sidebar navigation, sidebar should always be the depth of expertise, well, the top navigation should always be showing you the breadth of everything that's available to you through this organization. It really should be that 1,000-foot view of who you are and what you're able to offer. And the reason why I say that is because clicks are really valuable. You could potentially lose people if they have to click around in order to find content. And sidebar navigation content is really only available on page. So if we're, forcing someone to click 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times in order to see if you work in a particular field, if you work on a particular issue, what kinds of services you're providing, it can be fairly frustrating for someone to try and figure out who you are and who you're about. And more likely than not, they'll probably just go on another Google search to find another organization that can fit their needs. Changing links. So in this example that I have, I saw this quite a lot where the sidebar navigation would change after I've chosen a link. And this can be really confusing when me as an audience member and trying to orient myself to what your offering is. And it's very difficult for me to go back to maybe where I came from because I've gone down the wrong rabbit hole. So this is something I really try to, I try not to encourage this kind of behavior. I understand sites that have quite a lot of content, it could be fairly difficult to figure out ways of organizing that, but you really want people to feel like they know exactly where they are in your website at all times. You don't want to be changing that whole structure on them. It will make for a very poor user experience. And for mobile issues, again, a lot of the applications I've seen of sidebars in mobile devices have been the content of the page is at the very top and all of the sidebar content is at the bottom of the page. So on a mobile experience, if the majority of your audience are using mobile devices, they won't even see any of those links until they get to the bottom of the page. And there are some better ways of us implementing this particular feature. One thing that I try to push my clients towards is, can we combine content into a singular long page? Because again, it's much easier for people to scroll than it is for them to click. Click really assumes that they have bought in on some level. They really need to motivate themselves in order to click. Scrolling delivers content more quickly because there's no need to wait for a page to load. It doesn't require, again, any sort of commitment by forcing someone to make a choice to choose between where they are and maybe where they want to be. And it allows people to digest information at their own rate. Again, thinking about how the majority of people who use the web are scanners. They're really scanning large headers or maybe scanning images in order to get a quick sense of what the page is trying to tell them. And then they go back in and will hopefully read the rest of the content that you have there. So keeping that in mind, scrolling really is a better interaction for people in general rather than clicking. Another thing I like to utilize, and we're seeing this much more now, is the drop-down or mega menu pattern designs. And what these two top navigation design patterns allow us is a way to show more of the content available to our audience. So what I was seeing in 2020 was kind of a shift towards a really simple top navigation, maybe with like 4 or 5 links. And then once you clicked into one of those pages, then you were presented with additional options. I found that a lot of audience and target audience groups nowadays really want to see at really a high level, what are the things that, what is the value that this organization is going to bring me? And for a lot of organizations, that's information. Is it services? Is it, staying on top of the latest news or trends? It's all about providing information in a clear and succinct way. So I really like this option at the bottom right-hand corner for products and solutions. So you have all of your categories on your left, and then you have your solutions on your right. So you're able to showcase more pathways to content, whatever content you want to show, right in your top navigation, which I think is really accessible. And on mobile devices, it will be available in your either hamburger or your top navigation. So again, it's much more accessible on mobile devices to have all of these links in some sort of top navigation design. Autoplay videos. 2020, I think, was the year we all embraced videos. And I totally understand why. Having moving imagery, having sound, it can create a really powerful emotional connection. And I feel like the internet was kind of moving towards, integrating more videos, ever since probably the inception of the internet. Now we're seeing videos autoplay in YouTube, and we have autoplay videos on Facebook, and videos are just everywhere. And something that was really popular in 2019 and into 2020 was the use of these background videos. And a lot of clients thought they were really cool. They definitely wanted to implement them. It takes a little bit of time to create these videos, but it was definitely like the new thing that everyone wanted. However, now that we've kind of seen the impact of what these videos are, there's a couple of issues. One is accessibility. And actually, I personally have, experience with this. So I have vertigo, which means that I'm really sensitive to movement, and I can get quite dizzy when I see a lot of movement happening in my eyes. I can't even go to an IMAX movie because it'll make me motion sick. So if I encounter a site with a really large drone video flying through the trees, I immediately either scroll down or I click off the site because I can't handle that movement. And you want to be really sensitive to your audience. If you do have an audience who is very sensitive to movement like that, you don't want to necessarily be triggering that sort of bad emotional state for them. You want them to stay on your site. You want them to interact with you and to read and absorb your content. Slower page load. This hasn't been so much of an issue later in 2020. I think people have gotten much smarter about video compression and how long of a video they can really handle in the background. But it can affect your page load time if we're waiting for longer format videos to load on a page. It can slow down your site speed. And really the aim is to have your pages load in 3 seconds or less. So if it's really, if you're seeing that your pages are loading, 7 seconds or above, and you do have a background video, maybe take a look and see if that is the reason why you're seeing poor performance on that page. And distracting. Having things that are moving on the screen will immediately grab attention. They just command it. Your eyes see it. I feel like we're just naturally born to see what is moving out of the corner of our eye. So you want to pay attention to that. If the video or the content over your background video isn't the content you want people to focus on, it's actually in the section below or in 2 sections below, you might lose out on that attention and that focus. So you do want to be very thoughtful and mindful about how you're going to use background videos, where you're going to use them, and what is going to be said in association with that video. Now, that's not to say that I necessarily say that videos are bad. I think there's a movement towards integrating video in your content in an inviting way that doesn't necessarily autoplay them once you load the screen. This Yosemite design comp is a really great example of that. What I love about this example is it sort of does 2 things. It's like a big, beautiful hero image with a really great descriptor. You know exactly where you are, you're in Yosemite, and it invites you to watch the video, and it allows you to make that choice whether or not you want to view that video or not. Shopify also does a really great job at this. So this video is incorporated right below their hero statement, their elevator pitch. So you can orient yourself, you know exactly where you are, and it's an inviting image, and it's got a really great pink button that it's asking you to click on it. And then I would say if you do end up using, or your stakeholders want a background video, because I know a lot of my stakeholders still really like the idea of having a background video, choose really short, slow moving visuals that just create a general mood. You're not looking for these videos to provide any sort of content in any way. You really just wanted to set the tone of who you are, or maybe it just showcases one of the biggest values that you can get from the services. Maybe I think we've done a video that, for lots of healthcare, it's a lot of healthy people doing yoga outside, you want that feeling of well-being. So just creating a sense of space and place. Buttons. I don't know, guys. I feel like in 2018 or so, the biggest issue I felt like we had with buttons was that we couldn't find them, that the design wasn't eye-catching enough, that I, as a user, did not necessarily know how to interact with pieces of content. I didn't know that there was a page behind this link, or this gray colored text, or this blue colored text. And I feel like we've sort of tipped the scale and gone the other way, where we want to provide all of the choices at our users' fingertips. And so we provide all of the buttons in the world to them. And I think it's great that we're trying to be as clear as possible, getting people to the content that they want, or the content that we would like them to focus on. I think that's very helpful. What isn't very helpful is that we're potentially inhibiting their ability to make decisions because we've provided them with just too many choices. There's this great user experience law called Hick's Law that I quote quite often, where the more choice you provide, the longer it's going to take someone to make a decision. And in the worst case scenario, they just feel overwhelmed, they don't know where to go, and they don't do anything. They just, stay where they are, or they leave. So we want to make very careful decisions about what are our main calls to action, what is the main strategy for this page, for this site, making sure that we provide those pathways and that helpful guidance through our site. And another thing is that too many buttons are quite distracting. They're competing for your attention. On this one page alone, this one design cop, we have 3 yellow buttons plus a blue and a green and a red button. Where exactly do you want me to go? Right now, we're putting a lot of we put a lot on the user to choose their own path, and I think that's great, but we should be looking at ourselves as the guide for these people to help them navigate our site and help them navigate to what we know is the main reason, the main value driver why they've come to visit us today. I think in general, what we need to consider as designers, as front-end developers, is figuring out a button hierarchy, just like we do heading hierarchy, just like we do content hierarchy, of making sure that the main call to action is really easy to find. And if you have secondary links that we want to link to, making those available, but not allowing the design of those buttons to distract and to take attention away from the main pathways. So in all of these examples, they're really great. We have some filled in buttons. That's the main thing that we want people to do in this application or on this site. And then in a lot of applications, we'll see buttons that are just outlined, or the secondary link might just be an underlined link. Something you do want to be careful about with links and with buttons, especially for accessibility, is to not rely solely on color to indicate that this thing you can interact with this thing. Because especially for individuals who might be colorblind or have a hard time seeing certain colors, that can be hard for them to distinguish, oh yes, this is also a link, I can interact with this. So using some sort of underline or some sort of iconography like an arrow is something I see quite often to indicate that this is something I can interact with and click on. All right. Those were the 5 things I had. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're about to take questions. I do just want to point out quickly that I have a whole list of additional research that I use for this presentation and research that I use in my own practice right now, which will be available to you when we upload the slides. So I just wanted to point that out for additional light reading, just light reading for all of you.
Thanks, Kim. That was great. And I have a couple of questions of my own before we switch over to the Q&A. And I just want to kind of, when you went over the pop-ups, we had this whole like internal discussion at Design for Drupal about our newsletter pop-up. And our marketing person was insistent that, you know, it works. And while they aren't like the best things in the world, like they accomplish what they're set out to do. And we're kind of on the side of like, yeah, but they're super annoying. Like nobody wants them. But we did experience getting a lot of new people signed up on our newsletter. So it just sounds like it's a delicate balance of trying to kind of find a place where it's not too annoying for the people who need it, but not as annoying for people who don't want it.
Yes.
And I don't know if you have any other like techniques or experience where clients were super insistent on having it, and whether you have any more commentary on it.
Yes, no. So I hear that from marketers quite often, and I can't argue with them. The research is there. They are quite effective at what they're meant to do. I think the thing then, if I know that I'm just not going to be able to convince them out of it, it's just making sure that the design is in such a way that we aren't, again, taking up more than 50% of the content space, especially on mobile devices, because we don't want to negatively affect our SEO rankings in any way. And I think most marketers can understand that and don't want to affect the SEO rankings. So that's just that's what I can say. You know, we need to be really succinct in the content that's in that pop-up. You know, one headline, one call to action. We can't do any more than that because we really can't take up that space.
Yeah, that makes sense. And thank you for sharing your kind of personal experience on the Vertigo piece, because I think, I don't know if it's common in the industry, but we, at like Redfin, we tend to shy away from the background video in general, just because a lot of times the reasoning for wanting it is just because it's cool, which
Yes.
Sure. But I wonder, have you had experience with kind of doing some of the techniques that you suggested where you have maybe a slower video? Is that something that does work with folks with vertigo, for example?
For me, yes. I wish I could have shown the site that I thought did a really great application, but it was like, in many cases, it's quite a slow pan, and maybe like wind is like rustling some leaves. Like it's nothing in your face. You're not seeing quick movements and clips of other reels happening at the same time. So I think there are great applications of it. I think people are getting much smarter at what they can use as a moving image in the backgrounds of their sites. In the beginning, it was really horrible for me because everyone wanted to use it because it was so cool. And
Sure.
So they were using any video.
Gotcha. We do have a few questions. First is from Ruth, and she's wondering how you handle option overload when dealing with multiple audiences, for example, like on a landing page.
Ooh, yeah. This is a great question. I deal with this actually quite often, sites that have like 4 to 5, target audiences. I think the thing that is key for me when we're dealing with multiple audiences is figuring out really where the priority is, because everyone can't be top priority. You're really trying to speak to 1, maybe 2 audiences at once. And then maybe there's just either happy accidents, like journalists and media. I always call my happy accident, like they just come to you because you're super cool and want to talk to you, but they're not someone you're seeking out actively. So who are you actively seeking out? And if you're still getting pushback that, no, we actually need to be servicing all of these audiences on a single page, a way that something that I do quite often is we'll do some sort of like quick link navigation, not necessarily a sidebar, but maybe it's a grouping of 4 to 5 links paired with a paragraph or something, just giving a bit more context about why we're providing links to different audience sections of the site. A way that you can also mitigate having lots of options on page as buttons is to be thoughtful in how you've organized your navigation to serve all those audiences, because I do imagine that you thought about that in your navigation as well. And if those pathways are clear, you don't necessarily have to provide all of those pathways on page.
Nicole has a question in regards to the sidebars. She has a lot of clients who have dense content around research, and she's wondering how you recommend using sidebars for this dense content. Do you have thoughts around jump links, for example?
Ooh. So I actually do have used sidebars as jump links. I think in that case, what I ended up using was a really unique icon to indicate that you weren't not going to another page, that you were just going down the page that you were on. Because most people, when they see a sidebar, they assume that it's going to take them to a brand new page fresh. So I wanted to be as clear as possible up front that what you're about to experience is just like a movement down the page, not necessarily a movement off to another page. Again, I think for dense research, and I have a lot of clients with a lot of content on their site that is quite dense, I would say, again, your top navigation should be the 1,000-foot view. It should be, what are the general topics? What are the general issues? What are the general services you're providing? And then the on-page navigation system should be the very in-depth look at a singular topic or a singular page, or maybe a singular report. And that sidebar navigation should help orient them, if it's a very long piece, to what is in that singular piece of content. So that way that sidebar is never changing. In order for them to see a whole new page or maybe a whole new topic, they have to use the top navigation. And I think that's really helpful to be very clear about when you use a sidebar and when you use your top navigation. So the experience is very cohesive as they move through your site.
Great. And sort of a similar question from Irving. You mentioned that the sidebar should be used for depth of knowledge, and he's wondering what your thoughts are on using the sidebar as a secondary navigation. They assume that it would be helpful to people to navigate the site instead of having to go back to the main menu again.
Yes. So again, that's how I particularly like to use sidebars. I do see the allure of having it as a secondary navigation. It's much easier to access the sidebar navigation than it is necessarily a top navigation. I would just hesitate against, like the example in the slides, where if I'm interacting with the sidebar navigation anyway, from once I click on a link to it switching to an entirely new sidebar navigation because I've moved to a different section of the site. That can be very confusing, and it's harder for them to understand that switch without the context of the rest of the navigation. So it's easier for someone to say like, oh yeah, now I'm in an entirely new section of the site because I've gone to the top navigation and I'm under a different dropdown. When it's just happening on page, it's hard to have them reorient themselves like that. So I would just guard against that experience happening.
I have a couple more questions here, and then we will try to wrap things up. Question from Jason on pop-ups, and they say, I think that they work best when you have, when you give the user time to understand the value of what they're looking at. A pop-up in the first 2 seconds is going to get closed immediately without reading as an annoyance. On exit intent, or after 10 seconds or more, they perform even better because someone has had time to understand the quality of the content. So it sounds like more of a comment than a question, but do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I 100% agree. Yeah, anything, and a lot of sites do this, they open the pop-up immediately when you get onto the site and you're like, wait, but I haven't, I don't know anything about you. Like, why would I agree to this newsletter sign up? So I totally agree. You need to give them time to understand what the value is, and then they'll be more apt to convert.
Yeah, and there's another comment Jason provided, which was just that for WCAG 2.2.2, having pause, stop, and hide options for videos is really important as well,
Yes.
which I agree with too. Les, I think that's all the questions we have. Leslie, do you have anything else you want to add?
I don't. I just wanted to say thank you, Kim. It was an excellent presentation. I'm sure everybody that was on really enjoyed the content and the insights that you provided today. So we appreciate you hopping on. We appreciate Kanopi giving you the time to join our webinar.
Yes, thank you for having me and inviting me to speak today.
Yeah, thanks so much. All right. Thanks, everybody. We will be in touch with the plans moving forward with d4d, and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.